I'm super proud of my wife. She's a preschool teacher. She works with kids with special needs, and you can tell she loves her job, and it's all about the kids. When I think about perspective, I think about bodybuilding. When I see her do her thing, it just kind of puts, the bodybuilding thing in check for me, that, what I do is a hobby. And I try not to, stress myself to perfection. I try to enjoy myself. And when I think about this prep more from a holistic perspective, you think about not just trying to be, on point with, all the X's and O's, but more so how the X's and O's integrate with life as a whole. I need to just, try to progress in an environment where I'm enjoying myself. Again, just want to say thanks to my wife for always keeping it real, keeping me in check. So let's get to the prep. Welcome to episode number 6, Project 3550. So I am still ahead of schedule. I'm hitting new lows on the scale. I saw some 194s this week. On the average, I'm roughly 195 and some change. So for this particular point of my prep, I'm ahead of schedule still. So that just allows that flexibility. But over the next 4 weeks, same trajectory. I'm still looking to take off a pound a week. I want to get to roughly 193 pounds over the next 4 weeks. In a sense, and that's 2 pounds from where I'm at now. And it just allows that flexibility to where I could enjoy the social aspects a little bit more, is because I started early. I'm giving myself plenty of time to take this weight off. And again, when you have that timeline, you're going to have more control over adjusting, and you also are going to be probably a little more relaxed through the process. So the game plan so far is working extremely well. I'm really happy with the progress as far as seeing the weight coming off, roughly 10 pounds down now the first 8 weeks. And visually, I can tell there's some changes, but it's still, I'm probably a good 10 to 15 pounds away from really looking more of the part of a bodybuilder. My training, and keep in mind, as I'm talking, this is related to my context, because oftentimes when you're absorbing the information or you're seeing maybe the training program and all that, it could, let's say, go against the grain as far as the general information that's out there in regards to, let's say, programming, volume as in sets, rep ranges, reps in reserve, that type of thing, progressions, etc. So just keep in mind, what I'm about to say, it's all related to my individual context. When it comes to the frequency, I try to shoot for 4 days per week, upper lower split, hitting each body part in a sense twice per week. But life happens. Also, fatigue happens. So there's been many weeks so far this prep where I've only trained 3 days per week because, I've had some things I had to do with life, or, I was just feeling really tired and needed an extra day of rest. I like to talk supply and demand a lot, meaning, the demand as far as the deficit itself, the training, the steps, the cardio, outside stressors like life, work, that type of thing. Whereas your supply is your food level, it's your rest days, it's your sleep, things of that nature. So I try to kind of look through a lens of supply and demand. I have no problem at all. Okay, you know what? I'm just going to take an extra rest day here to balance out that supply and demand. Then that's just going to up my supply. And the days that I am training on, if there's more supply, I'm going to perform better. I'm going to be able to, maybe lift a little heavier. Maybe I can do, a little more reps. So to me, I think it's super important that, I'm managing that supply and demand out really well. And that's one of the tools I use to do it, is those rest days. And when it comes to deload, personally, I don't schedule deloads into my programming, and the reason is because I use auto-regulation. I just take more recovery days, and on occasion, as far as the training days themselves, if I'm feeling tired, I'll pull back a little bit, whether I'm, doing, one less set, or dropping the loads down, or leaving more reps in reserve, or a combination of those things. I just, in a sense, try to make the training session itself not as hard. And you add that to an extra rest day, and that usually does the trick. For almost every single exercise that I'm doing, I'm only doing 3 main sets. I don't really count warm-ups, but my top sets, the main sets, I'm only doing 3, with the exception of 2 sets on my leg curls. And the reason I only do 2 sets on leg curls is because, one, my hamstrings are probably my strongest body part, but also I typically do a hip hinge prior to it. So we're looking at 3 sets of hip hinging, so the hamstrings are getting, a decent amount of work. So I typically keep the volume at 3 sets, and the reason it's always at 3 sets because that's a baseline. I'm going to have a better read on how well I can perform with that, and also how well I can recover from it. I think that's super important that, there's a decent amount of consistency in order to get a better read on what's working and what's not working. So that's why I typically kind of just keep the sets more or less the same. And I rely more on, let's say, effort in improving or increasing overall volume. Effort meaning, let's say, pushing closer to failure at times, or lifting a little bit heavier, or trying to, let's say, hit the top end of my rep ranges. So in a sense, I'm gunning for performance. Also, it's really hard to predict, how my weeks are going to be going, as far as what that overall demand is going to throw at me, as far as, hey, am I going to be sleeping well in a certain week? What's work going to be like in a certain week? Is something as far as life going to be thrown at me? So whatever goes on outside the gym, let's say, as far as the overall supply and demand, that's hard to predict. So, for me to say, okay, I'm going to have a block of training where, let's say, in week number 3 or 4, I have a 4-set week or a 5-set week. Like, I have no idea what my overall demand is going to be at that time. So it kind of makes not too much sense for me personally to kind of program myself that way. I'd rather be able to be reactive. So let's say, for example, it's a really stressful week. Lots going on, not sleeping well. I don't have the energy to perform at my best. Well, hey, you know what? Now I can kind of, again, sets are at 3. I can say, hey, let's just train at the low side of the rep range, and let's keep more reps in reserve. It's still going to be enough training to, create enough of a stimulus to maintain muscle mass. But I'm not going to drive fatigue levels up, too much. The effort isn't, let's say, where it typically is. It's a little bit of a lower effort. So again, that allows that supply to possibly catch up. And if, let's say, it's a week where I say, okay, I'm tired, let me throw in 2 refeed days. Let me make sure I'm getting in bed a little earlier. And hey, let's try to knock out some of that life stress and really, kind of attack that. Then I might be able to balance out that supply and demand a little bit better. But again, if I just ignore all these things and I say, okay, I'm going to do 5 sets because the spreadsheet says 5 sets, and I drive, let's say fatigue levels up even further because of that, the following week may not go too well, or you just may not feel all too good, and that's not fun. Maybe you're more of a grump and things like that. And if I'm more of a grump, I don't want to take it out on my wife or my kids or anything like that. So again, it's more about holistic bodybuilding. I think about all these different parts when it comes to, my programming and how I go about my training. As far as, rep ranges, in the first couple of sessions, it's, a little bit heavier in nature. And then as far as the back half of my week, or the second lower day, second upper day, the rep ranges go up a bit. Again, to kind of just give my connective tissue a little bit of a break. What I've noticed with myself personally, when I stay heavy, moderate to lower rep ranges, my lower moderate to rep ranges, connective tissue gets a little bit pissed off at me. So the higher rep ranges just give my joints a little bit of a break there. And exercise selection plays another huge role for me as far as how to manage the overall demand of my training. I typically don't do more than, let's say, one big hard compound movement. Like you'll notice in my leg days, it's a leg press, but then after that, I don't have like a deadlift or anything like that. It's like a leg press and a hyperextension. Hyperextension is not as demanding as a deadlift or an RDL. So I don't want to, let's say, have my overall demand with that session too high, because I just don't recover too well nowadays when I do more than, let's say, one hard movement in a given session. So I kind of alternate these hip hinging movements. And then on the upper body, I only do one pressing movement, like one chest pressing movement in a given session, because if I try to do more than that, my shoulders and elbows are like, what are you doing to me? Of course, I would love to be able to do, let's say a couple of chest pressing movements, because my chest is, let's say, one of my weaker body parts, in my opinion. Like my upper chest needs to come up a bit. But again, with these recovery issues, as far as the connective tissue, I can't really push it more than that. Like sometimes we try to be, let's say, optimal, like hey, we need to do this volume, or we need to do all these exercises, or what have you. We're trying to be optimal from a competitive bodybuilding perspective. But sometimes if you push things too far, then you start getting aches, pains, or injury, then it's really going to make you suboptimal. So basically taking what my body's going to allow me. As far as reps in reserve, I put a range there. Like I don't strategically say, okay, first set three reps in reserve, second set would be 2, and third set 1. And the reason that I don't do it that way is I like to have a little more flexibility and freedom set to set. So typically on some movements, usually in my first set, even after warming up a good deal, my body's not used to, a heavy load. First set's like, wow, okay, that feels heavy, and, I have to kind of get my connective tissue used to it. I got to get my muscles need to get used to that load. So the first set is usually kind of like more of an acclimation, and I usually don't have the same type of intensity and effort on that first set. So I might hit, let's say 10 reps on a first set, and it might feel like 1 rep in reserve, but then the second set, I feel more acclimated and it's a little bit smoother. So my confidence goes up because I'm like, okay, I'm not as creaky, I'm more acclimated, I can push now, I have more effort here. So I can basically get the same number of reps on a lot of my exercises on the second set and still have the same reps in reserve. And then what I do on occasion, going from set 2 to set 3, is, okay, if I want to try to use this same load and try to hit the same number of reps and still have, like, let's say 1 rep in reserve and not go to failure, let's say, then instead of, let's say, resting 1 minute or 2 minutes or however long I've rested, and I don't time my rest periods per se, I just kind of go by feel. I know, hey, if I, let's say, listen to an entire song, I'm resting longer than I did the last set or something like that. So I'll rest longer in order to, again, bring supply up. So when I go to do that last set, third set, there's more energy there. I'm more rested. My heart rate has come down, and I'm ready to go. I'm recharged. And then, I wouldn't say 100% of the time, but a good chunk of the time, I'm able to basically duplicate the same number of reps, right around the same reps in reserve. So, again, whether I'm looking at supply and demand from a broad or grand scale, like setting up refeeds and things like that, or setting up the entirety of my contest prep, like giving myself a full year to manage that supply and demand. I also do it on a very acute scale, like set to set. Okay, how can I get the most out of myself in the next set? More rest. So, I do things like that in order to kind of keep performance elevated and, again, managing fatigue as well. As far as progression, I auto-regulate that based on how I'm feeling in a given session. I'll kind of look at what I did the previous session, see where my numbers are at, how many reps I've hit with a load, where the reps in reserve wherever those were met, and then I basically kind of go from there. Okay, let's see if I can maybe increase load, or hey, same load, let's try to increase reps, or same load, same reps, let's see if I can do better on the reps in reserve. So instead of leaving one in the tank, let's see if two are in the tank. So in a sense, you're moving that load a little bit more efficiently. I will say what a good system is, an honest system that maybe some of you guys can maybe try out. Double progression, in a sense, starting with a low and gravitating more towards the low end of a rep range, let's say. With that load, you work to the high end of the rep range. Once you're successful hitting all your sets at the high end of the rep range, and I'll even add a layer to it, also at the high end of a reps in reserve range. And then I'll even add another layer with, let's say, at least 9 out of 10 form, meaning you're not cheating, you're not trying to use leverage, you're not trying to, use momentum to move the weight. Like if you're hitting all your sets, high end of the rep range, high end of a reps in reserve range with great form, then that means you've basically mastered that load. And then you can graduate to the next load, and you just add, whatever the case may be, 5 to 10 pounds, 2.5 to 5 kilos, and rinse and repeat the process. It'll keep you very honest. You're still going to get effective reps, and you're, in a sense, potentially, you can kind of limit the risks for injury, aches, and pains. I don't have any research on that, but it's just, common sense kind of tells me having that honest system in place, you'll probably be better off over the long haul. So that's basically kind of my training in a nutshell. Of course, as we continue the prep, I'm sure I'm going to have to make some modification. The deeper I get into it, the overall demand is going to continue to kind of escalate over time. The leaner I get, potentially calories are going to be lower. Potentially my steps go up. So again, that means demand is going up. In the training, if it stays the same, but yet I'm able to keep performing well, because that's probably going to be the case. Like I'm going to be able to probably elevate performance with some of my lifts. That's another increase in demand. That might mean I'm going to have to adjust some things, like, okay, I might need extra rest days. I might need more training days where I'm not pushing as hard. I might need more refeeds. Hey, I might just need to get in bed a little sooner, sleep in a little later, and try to lower overall life stress if that's possible. But again, these are all the things that, you have to take into consideration. And, again, holistically, you have to look at, all the parts, and basically account for all of that, and not just look at these little individual parts and focus all your attention on those things like, oh, I need to increase my volume. So again, you have to look at the big picture with all this and try to manage it the best that you possibly can. So hopefully you got something out of this. Hope you guys have another great week. Again, I really do appreciate the support. Any questions, comments, of course, drop them below. I'll do my best to get to you guys. Again, have fun with this. It's a hobby, and don't stress yourself to perfection.